What's going on, YouTube? Today's project, we're going to be building this chop saw station. So I'm real big on everything being mobile in the shop. I got some casters welded to the front of this. All you do is tilt it towards you. It moves around the shop pretty easily. Takes a pretty small footprint when you're not using it. I got the height set an 1/8 inch above the rest of my other workbenches, so I can use those for support for long material. I believe we got about 32 inches on either side of the blade. We can use the back right here for setting stops and supporting the material. I've had a problem with chipping teeth on these blades, and they're pretty expensive, so I want to stop that. We've got a shelf down on the bottom side of this. I got my bandsaw on there, or portable bandsaw, down there right now. I'm probably going to end up building some kind of a chip tray for this guy, just to keep the mess down. These legs are hinged, and they just fall down out of the way, and then the support falls down inside of there. Like I said, it takes a pretty small footprint when you're not using it. Put it away for storage, just get it out of the way. Pretty happy with it so far. I haven't done a whole lot of work with it, but let's get to it. So we're going to start by mitering up the pieces that the chop saw actually sits inside of. I believe this is just 1.5" angle iron, like 1/8 inch wall, something like that. I got a magnet set up on the offcut. That's, like I said, I was having problems with chipping blades. Really controlling that offcut helped that out a lot. After cleaning up the edges for weld, we're going to go ahead and make sure this thing's nice and square as we lay it out, and then tack it in place and final weld it up. So because other piece is going to get welded to this, we're going to go ahead and grind these welds off. On the inside where the chop saw is actually going to sit, we have to grind that down flat. I actually used a carbide burr in a die grinder, try and get that nice and smooth. It was just the easiest way I found to do that. These pieces are just 1-inch bars that we're going to weld in place, and then we'll mark out for a hole location, and these are actually what we use to bolt down the chop saw to the stand. For tacking these legs on, I normally like to tilt them forward a little bit, leave a gap on the back side and outside corners where we're going to put a tack, and with a gap there it'll leave us a little bit of play where we can get that nice and square afterward. When we start tacking up these lower shelf braces, we're going to use a 1.5 inch thick piece of wood just as a standard stop to keep everything off the table the same amount. We're going to tack everything in place, and then we'll go back through and make sure even the legs on the upper side are not fully welded yet. So we'll get everything tacked in place and then go through, check square before we weld everything up. This is just a piece of 16 gauge sheet metal we're going to use for the bottom shelf. Cuts out just fine with the angle grinder. Be sure to round off the corners and leave yourself a good 1/8 inch gap, that kind of stuff, for putting it in place. Here we're cutting up the 1.5 inch square supports that's actually going to support the material. Now the back piece, actually what we're going to use for stops, is going to be one piece, but then lower uprights that actually support the material vertically is they're about 5 inches long, and there's 3 of them on each side. You can add more or less depending on what your preference is. So after getting the saw bolted down to the stand, I got a piece of channel that we're going to clamp everything to, keep everything nice and square and straight when we're getting ready to set up for and weld the hinges. Okay, so for the vertical uprights for the outside of the 1.5 inch square, we're gonna put 1/2 inch dowel, weld it to the 1.5, and then this tubing will just slip on the outside of that, and that'll keep it on location. And then on the bottom side, we'll weld in some adjustable feet for raising up and down, depending on where I set it in my shop. Once we get them dowels in place, we'll go ahead and weld everything up, final, complete. Tear everything apart, clean it up with a wire brush, sanding pad, and then acetone before we take it outside and put a couple cans of paint on it. So for final assembly, we'll put our channel back in place. Just keep everything squared up true. After that, we'll use nylocks on the bolts holding the chop saw down, and there you go, project done.